Now you've seen the Paladin in two of my mini playthroughs. First was the Hammerdin as Mr. Dad Boy, and then as a holy zealer, Mr. Do You Even Pray Bro. You've seen their successes and their struggles, and man did they die a lot. Honestly, I blame their not so awesome gear. But what if they did have awesome gear? Hey people, Chinmay here, and welcome to the first ever post-mini playthrough analysis, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Paladin. In this series I want to revisit my characters with whom I've completed Hell, and then take them a little further, give them awesome gear, and find out what more can they do. So sit back, relax, as we're going to venture through 3 builds on my 2 Paladins, starting off with... Now cutting right to the chase, this whole video was inspired by this one build. I had been doing some LK farming with my Cold Sorceress for about 2.5 odd months, and it all culminated with this. Funny story, I found 2 Burr runes actually in those months, and only 3 Sir runes, even though Burr runes are supposed to be like 5 times rarer to draw from those super chests. Anywho, for people who are keeping score at home, that led to this, my first ever Enigma. Now this character is more or less centered around this particular armor, and I don't blame him. It is, after all, the best item in the game. It could honestly have no other stat other than +1 to teleport, and I would still argue that it could be the best because of how important positioning and mobility is, but it does have other stats, and excellent ones. +2 to all skills, 45 faster run walk, huge defense, huge strength bonus, damage reduction of 8%, and huge magic find per level. Took me 2.5 months to grind out these runes, and I think it was absolutely worth it. So you may have noticed me mention that this character is centered around this item. That basically means that I wanted to get 125 FCR on this guy because of that, so that I could use this mobility provided by it to the fullest. Therefore, I have Hodo as my weapon, because it gives me a strong start with 40 FCR, also +3 to skills, which adds a huge bump to my offense, and 31 all res. A crappy roll, but it certainly helps out my defense. Similar is the case with Shaco. If Enigma is the best item in the game, this thing has to be at least the most popular. +2 to skills, huge life and mana, 10% damage reduction, and huge magic find. Noticing a theme here of how all the best items have the word huge in their description? Size does matter, people. It's unfortunate, but true. My shield continues that theme of huge stats, with Spirit giving me 35 additional FCR, bringing the total up to 75. With that, I also get +2 to skills, excellent FHR bonus, and some really nice resistances to go along with the life and mana bonuses. Now I built this inside a base which already had 31 all res, and the 35 FCR is the max roll on it and is kinda necessary to get to the 125 with my setup. What also helps my setup is a lot of MF, and my boots help me out there. These I actually found on this guy itself from Nightmare Disguise, if you may remember from the mini playthrough, and they also happen to be the best war traps I have with 47% magic find. Paired with that, I'm using Mage Fists on my other limbs. Now the reason for these is the FCR, which I needed and now is up to 95%. I prefer these over Trangules because A, they look cooler, and less importantly because I don't need the cold res from Trangs, and the mana regen from these helps out. Similarly, I'm wearing a Rax because it is the best looking belt in the game, and also the +1 to skills with 20 FCR are nice bonuses. With that, the total FCR is up to 115%, which means I only need 10 more. I don't get them from neither of my rings since they're both 30% MF Nagels. Now, bonus points to anybody who can guess which mini playthrough character found these, and if you thought that it was the Barb, you would be correct. Honestly, don't even be impressed too quickly though. That guy kinda had a thing for finding insane unique rings. And if you know, you know. These for now help out my Paladin a lot since 60% magic find is a huge buff, and thus I can have my amulet to be the source of the 10 FCR, and I really like this amulet. It's very basic but very good at the same time. +1 to Paladin skills, always nice. 10 FCR, which brings my total up to 125. Some light resistances, 14 for all the important ones and 49 for poison, and then some magic find as well, cause why not? This one thing literally contributes to all stats I care about, and I love it. My resistances are nothing to jump about though. They're good, just they're not as good as they could be. That's because most of my gear is focused mostly on magic find, and as a result, my magic find is pretty good at 450%. A huge contributor to this are my charms, since they're mostly all 7, 6, or 5% MF small charms, with I think one Fire Rest Grand Charm sitting there awkwardly, but that is pretty much just acting as a placeholder for a unique large charm that I may find soon. Now in that character screen we also can see that my damage is pretty decent at around 8.5k with hammers, which goes up to 9k with battle command, which is quite impressive. This damage comes by my skill distribution, maxing out Blessed Hammers and all of its synergies, and my offensive aura, which is concentration. In the defensive aura tree, I also have a point into redemption. This skill is great. After killing a bunch of monsters, this thing can pretty much give you back all the mana and life you would have lost in the fight, thus pretty much alleviating the need to use potions at all. The rest of the points I am putting into Holy Shield as I level up. Of course, redemption is not the only way that my Paladin regens mana. My mercenary helps there a lot. He does that with the help of Insight. Now I have it in a Cryptic Axe, and this provides some good damage for my mercenary and also provides me with a level 12 meditation aura. That is the worst possible level for meditation, yes, but it is enough for my purposes, thankfully. This weapon does lack lifesteal, and so I stuck an Endariel's Visage on him to give him 9% life leech, and 20% attack speed helps out as well. Also, if you're wondering that armor looks like an e-bugged fort, you would be right. Now in the 2.5 months down at LK, I found 2 low runes, everything considered, and I used one of those here. I mean, this thing is again pretty OP and makes this merc a tank. 300% enhanced damage, so he hits super hard, and 200% enhanced defense, so he takes hits well as well. Also, it adds 30 all resistances and some nice life bonus, which further increases his tankiness. The base could have been better, but this is still good enough, and it gets him over 3000 defense. With that, his damage is shown to be 3.7k here, but with the concentration aura after the battle command, he dishes out damage close to 7000, which is crucial for him to leech back as well. About the only upgrade that I would really want for him is to have a better weapon base for the Insight. The Cryptic Axe is good, but an Ethereal Thresher would be the dream, since not only would it add more damage, but also some nice attack speed on the base. I also have a CTA on swap, which I may have mentioned a couple times before this. Only 4 BO unfortunately, but honestly it does the job, so it works quite well. I need that high life because me and my mercenary are going to do some pretty intense magic find running. Let me show you an example. So first I put my players up to 7 and go run the Hell Pits. You can see how nice that 125 FCR feels while teleporting, and it is the major reason why I decided to bump up to that breakpoint. It also helps me fly off hammers in quick succession, so I do a lot of damage, which is why I am able to kill monsters at such a high player's level. Also at such a high player's level, monsters tend to drop a bunch of stuff, which is why I like to use a loot filter to focus on the most important things: items and runes. Player 7 gives me a pretty good chance to find high runes, and that's why I run at that setting. Not to mention that the pits is a TC85 area which allows for every item in the game to drop in here, so that's good as well. So after clearing up the boss packs that I find in here, I like to put my players down to players 5 and then do an Andy run. Now my Dariel can't drop all items in the game, but she does have a particularly high chance to drop rings and amulets, and I still haven't found stuff like a BK ring or a Mara's amulet. And as it turns out, I still haven't found a Mara's kaleidoscope. Great. Now with my players setting at 5, I go on to Act 3 to run Travincle. Now these guys can be tricky since my fire res is not the best, and also the mercenary is also susceptible to die, so I tend to use my rejuice here quite frequently. These guys are notorious for dropping nice runes though, which is why I run them at players 5. Now you may have noticed I completely skipped Act 2. That's because the farming spot of Ancient Tunnels has a lot of magic immunes. Also, I just don't like the Ancient Tunnels. I didn't even used to run it much on my Blizzard Sorceress when it was the most accessible TC85 area to me. Thankfully, now I have Enigma, and with my Hammerdin, I like to kill Mephisto next. Now, in this particular instance, I was doing it on players 5, but later, I turned it down to players 3 because I thought that was the best. That's because you can tell that it took me a while to kill him at players 5, and it was just not seeming practical, and the odds of getting items were not getting proportionally increased with the difficulty of actually killing him. Mephisto runs are still good though, since there are some nice uniques he can still drop me. Dracule's grasp. So, yeah. Anyways, after taking Mephisto down is when I definitely put the players down to 3 because then it's chaos time. I probably can do a chaos run at players 5, but it would be very risky, and the main two culprits of that are Infector and Decise. Infector does a lot of fire damage to both me and my mercenary, and pretty much every single run forces me to use a rejuvenation on players 3 itself, so it would be even worse at players 5. Plus, I won't really get much benefit in terms of drops, and I can't really do much to shield against Decise and his brutal physical attacks, which often end up making my merc lie flat, if I'm not careful. Best thing is to get him close to Decise so that he can deal damage to him and leech back the damage he's been taking from his minions. Grand Vizier is okay. Now, Diablo. Now Diablo dies pretty quickly on players 3, and that's also another reason why I don't think players 5 is worth it in the chaos. That's because Diablo's XP is capped out at players 3 in Hell, so I won't get much benefit there at a higher player's difficulty anyways. Now he also can't drop every item in the game neither, but still, he has a good chance to drop some of the items that I'm missing, and as mentioned, the XP from him is nice. Now from here I like to put my players back on 7 and then do Shank and Eldritch in Act 5. These guys are slow attacking and easy to take down, and thus player 7 is my preferred setting while fighting them. Also, it gets me ready to save an exit and start over again with the pits. You may be wondering I forgot to talk about Bale runs, but I actually don't like doing Bale runs on this guy at all. I mean, I can kill pretty much everything in the throne on players 3 except for wave 2. These guys are magic immune and thus I have to drop down to players 1, and even still, they cause me a lot of problems since I have to use the much weaker and slower attack of Holy Bolt. For that reason, I don't find it enjoyable to include Bale in my runs. Not to mention, Bale takes ages to kill with a Hammerdin at players 3 anyways. Maybe next time, buddy, when I build a different character, I'll see you again. Speaking of a different character, I bring to you the Holy Zealer. Now the Hammerdin does great against large groups of monsters in open areas, but often struggles with high health monsters in tight spaces, which is where this guy's role comes in. Now I have geared him specifically to run 3 different areas for now: the Countess, the Summoner, and Nilithak, since he is going to be my primary key finder for the Pandemonium event. Starting off with his weapon, I have Crescent Moon on him. This is one of the best weapons a Holy Shock Zealer can have, and the reasons are as follows. First is a chance to cast Static Field. Now that's great since you can get damage on multiple enemies really consistently and the output is quite fast. That is because this weapon is built in a phase blade and has 20% increased attack speed from the Shale rune in the rune word. The other highlight stat of the weapon is minus 35% lightning resistant, which adds insane amounts of damage against non-lightning immune monsters. Just for reference, the popular Griffin's Eye only adds minus 20%, and that thing is mad popular. Trust me, you gotta try it to know how good it is. Now, like with the Hammerdin, I was aiming for FCR. With this guy, I'm aiming for 75% increased attack speed to reach the max frames possible for a phase blade. On that note, we have my headgear, Kira's Guardian. This is an amazing Kira's for 2 reasons. 1, it has 69 all res for the lol factor, and 2, it has the best jewel I have found yet with 15% increased attack speed and 30% lightning resistance. If it had been 30% fire resistant instead, it would have made an excellent jewel for Andes, but the lightning resistance will help out later, you'll see. Right now, the IAS from this and the weapon takes us up to 35% in total. That number goes up to 55% with High Lord's Wrath. This amulet is great too because of the aforementioned attack speed it adds, and also the +1 to skills adds damage to my Holy Shock. My shield should be a familiar face to those who watch this guy in the mini playthrough. It is the source of life tap and pretty much the survival of this guy, the Exile. Now you obviously don't need this expensive shield on him to get life tap, but I happened to build this before finding a pair of Drax, so that's why I take it with me everywhere. As for the other stats on it, high defense, some resistances are all nice, but that life tap is crucial. Next, my boots give me the crucial stats of Crushing Blow since they're Gore Riders. I personally prefer these to Goblin Toes, even though their Crushing Blow is low. They add 30% faster run walk instead, with 15% deadly strike and 10% open wounds, which are all excellent creature comforts. My rings are both Ravenfrosts. Although my Kira's already provides me with Cannot Be Frozen, I still like to put these on due to the good bonus to attack rating and dexterity these provide. They really help out a melee character, and also the 20% cold absorb on each. You never know when you'll need that, especially since my cold resistance isn't maxed out, so that's always nice to have. Then we have the Enigma, again. You didn't think I would waste 2.5 months of my life and then only use this thing once, did ya? I mean, it just helps that it's so wonderful on pretty much every character trying to farm something because of the mobility provided by teleport. Additionally, this guy really enjoys the 45% faster run walk since I haven't specced into Vigor, and the damage reduced by 8% is nice as well. Now for teleporting, I need some FCR as well, and I have 2 sources to make it so that the process isn't painfully slow. Number 1 is Arachnid's Mesh. This provides me with 20 FCR to boot and also gives me +1 to skills to increase my Holy Shock damage. The other is a Spirit Shield that I have on my offhand with 35 FCR, bringing me above the 45 breakpoint. The other purpose this shield serves is giving me additional skills while I cast BO with my call to arms, which I also have on Switch. So that's where I get my FCR, but to complete my IAS breakpoint I have the final piece of gear, Laying of Hands. Possibly the best 20% IAS gloves out there because of the additional 50% fire rest they provide. Now that takes my IAS to 75% as I alluded to before, and my res are both maxed out in the fire and lightning elements. That is in huge part thanks to the cuirass. As you can see, the massive difference this one item makes is insane, and that's why I love having it over something like G-Phase, which would be better for a more offensive based approach. Speaking of offense, my attack rating is a lot better than it was with my cheapo mini playthrough gear, and that is because I have filled my inventory with max damage AR charms to help with it. As for skills, it is what you would expect from a Holy Shock Zealer. Maxed out Zeal for the attack rating, I max Sacrifice for the additional physical damage. I only put 1 point into Holy Shield since my dexterity investment makes it easier to get max block. Then I maxed out Holy Shock, obviously. I have also maxed Resist Lightning for the synergy and additional max lightning resistance, and I am putting all the rest of my points into Salvation since it also boosts the damage of Holy Shock. My mercenary is again an Insight Merc. Now Infinity would be better on him, but since Burr runes don't grow on trees, this is the best I can do. This still helps out a lot for mana regeneration, especially while teleporting. His rest of the gear is pretty ghetto with Treachery Armor and Tal Rasha's Mask. I don't really need him to do much damage, mostly require him for the meditation and Might Aura, and his gear allows him to survive long enough to provide those. Now for some gameplay action. So, like I mentioned before, I use this guy primarily for running super uniques that drop keys to the Pandemonium event. So I put my players on 5 and went to the Countess. You can see that I teleport with my offhand after casting BO with it. This allows me to get 45 FCR breakpoint, which is not too bad. Also, the 75% IAS breakpoint feels really good as well, as you can see right there. Now with that I went to kill the Countess first. Traversing through the tower without teleport would take much longer, and that's why Enigma plus Insight combo does wonders here. While killing the Countess though, you feel the lack of infinity as it does take a little while to kill her, especially if she hides behind her minions. Once you do though, you have a pretty good chance to drop a key at players 5. Oddly enough, the Countess key is actually the one that I seem to find the least of. After killing her, however, I left the players at 5 and teleported over to the Summoner. Again, navigating through the arcane while dodging monsters and elite packs is where Enigma shows its worth. The Summoner is often easier to kill since you can often find him standing alone or with a few monsters beside him, and thus farming the Key of Hate is not that much of a problem. Of course, we need 3 of each, and before that, we actually gotta get the third one. For that, we gotta go down to the Halls of Pain to face Nilithak. Now for this, I recommend putting on some piece of equipment which provides the stat Slain Monsters Rest in Peace. I like Nature's Peace for this purpose. This basically doesn't allow Nilithak to corpse explode your kills. Now, he can still corpse explode the monsters your mercenary kills, but still, that is a lot more manageable with life tap. Also, it should be noted that I did these runs on players 1 since the monsters around Nilithak, namely herpes, archers, and of course poison snakes, can be deadly. Finding the key did take me a while though, but thankfully I had some decent magic find from my Enigma, and before I found that, I found a unique cryptic axe, the Tomb Reaver. Now this was a pretty exciting drop since this is actually the first time I have found this weapon, and gosh, could it be any worse? Still, I know something that could be worse. That's the experience of killing a high health monster with a Holy Shock Sealer, like D-Clone. I would say that he actually does a better job at this than the Hammerdin since A, he has more resists to take Diablo's elemental damage, B, Crushing Blow and Static Field help in killing him quickly, and C, Life Tap. What's more, killing D-Clone with this guy actually landed me a 1329 anti-charm, pretty much the best one I have found so far. What's not to love? Well, the hint to that question is in front of you. Notice how quickly those SOJs are being sold to the vendors? Yeah, I may have changed some pluggy files around to spawn D-Clone quicker. That's because I literally can't do much on this guy that my Hammerdin can't already do like 5 times better, so waiting for D-Clone to spawn on his own is absolutely insane. If only there was another melee paladin build which could make use of all the aforementioned advantages. Enter the Smiter. Okay, you probably saw this coming from a mile away, but next up we have the Smiter. This is basically how I plan to use Mr. Do You Even Pray Bro for the rest of his life, and this is gonna be his gear. So first he's using the rune word Grief in a faceplate. But before I go further, I would like to point out that my gear can be considered expensive, and if you want to see a cheap Uber Smiter, I will leave a card link to this awesome guy's video where he used items like Black, G-Face, and Goblin Toes to make his Smiter work. It's pretty good, so you should check him out. Me, I have spent a lot of time loitering around in LK, and thus I had a low rune to make Grief. Now this is probably the best melee weapon in the game. It is definitely top 3, but when you compare this to something like the Breath of the Dying or Last Wish, you start to appreciate it even more because of its relative affordability. The stat that basically makes this weapon is the 396 to damage stat. That's first of all a really good roll, and second, that damage is added directly to the weapon base damage, or in this case, the shield's smite base damage, after which the additional % enhanced damage modifiers will be added, which makes it do a lot of damage. Trust me, you'll see. Also with a Faceblade base, that attack speed on the weapon itself plus fanaticism, you will reach the max frames no problem. There is a reason why most smiters prefer this weapon over anything else, and I am stoked to use it. The other really quote-unquote expensive piece of my gear is my Exile. Now the guy whose link I put in the card used Drax, which, as you may have gathered with my whining earlier, I still have not found. I have this though, and it does a better job since it has a higher chance to cast Life Tap. What's more, it adds a ton of defense and provides a nice smite damage base as it is, being an ethereal elite paladin shield and all. Speaking of expensive gear and defense, Enigma. Now I know you're ready with a 9mm pointed at the screen about to shoot it as soon as I start singing the praise of this item or mention that I spent 2.5 months grinding it, but god damn it, it's so good. Also, I grinded it for 2.5 months. The main purpose that this serves though is again the mobility while trying to find the first 3 Ubers, those being Duriel, Iswol, and everybody's secret waifu, Lilith. That process can be made a lot easier with teleport. Now my IAS is sorted, but since I do want to teleport not painfully slow, I have Trank's gloves on. I put these on instead of Mage Fist since I would definitely need the cold res more, in part due to Mephisto's conviction aura and the fact that he indeed does a sizable amount of cold damage. Complementing their 20 FCR, I still have my 35 FCR Spirit offhand for both, giving me additional skill points while I use battle orders and for teleporting. So I chose Tranks instead of Arax for the FCR since I didn't really need the skill point from that belt and I have replaced it with a string of years. This provides me with some nice damage reduction and also some lifesteal for the time that we're waiting for life tap to cast. Now there are a lot of things I could have used here instead. A blood belt would work because it would add open wounds. A Rax, as mentioned before, would help because it would take me up to the 75 FCR breakpoint. Even Thunder God's Vigor would be a good option because the lightning absorb can come in really handy against somebody like Uber Mephisto. For that though, I have a Wisp Projector. Now I showed this ring on my plans for 2020 video and it is an insane roll. 20% lightning absorb, which is perfect, and 19% magic find, which is one off, but the latter won't really matter, and the first one can potentially save my ass in the future. It's pretty good stuff. Keeping the theme going, I have a Ravenfrost on as well. Now I don't need the attack rating or dex because Smite always hits, and I'm wearing a cuirass so I don't need the cannot be frozen, but the cold absorbed from this ring is still useful and can come in handy against Iswal, Duriel, and Mephisto. Just makes you appreciate what an incredible piece of equipment this ring is. Still, if you think that that's min-maxing at this stage, you can use something like a BK ring instead. I haven't found one yet, so I'll stick to my theory of the cold absorb being relevant. My boots are still Gore Riders. Goblin Toes honestly would be better here in retrospect, since the 30% faster run walk doesn't really matter because I'll mostly be teleporting, and that 10% additional crushing blow can be huge, especially since this is my only source of it. But honestly, you really can't go wrong with either, especially when you have an OP weapon like Grief on your main hand. Finally, I'm using the cuirass as mentioned before, and I hope the lightning res jewel that I stuck in here would pay dividends against Mephisto. Oh yeah, metal grid. This too. Again, any amulet with all res would work here. Mara's, Sarakin's Chance, a prismatic amulet that you can get using one magic amulet, and 6 perfect gems. Just get them res looking nice. You can see that mine are looking fairly nice with my defense at 24.7k, holy smokes, and my life at 1.2k, which goes up to 2.1k with battle orders. My build is pretty much a standard smiter with max smite and max holy shield, since they'll both up my damage and defense. After that, I have maxed fanaticism to get up my damage even further and my attack speed as well. The rest of the points I have invested into resist lightning, since that makes my max lightning res go from 75 to 85. As for my mercenary, he is a standard inside mercenary, and that's the only purpose he serves, providing me with the meditation aura while I teleport. I don't need him to deal damage since I'll be doing that, but still, I have put the fortitude on him more for the defenses. I also wanted to give him an Andy's face, but turns out he ain't ready yet, and is still level 82, so Tal's mask is a good second choice. The treachery he was wearing I have snagged, and I will be using the good old stand in the fire till you get faded trick to make my fairly nice resistances out of this world. Not to mention the additional damage reduction from fade never hurts. With that, let's get into some gameplay action, except not really, since I am apparently a noob. As it turns out, you can only open the portals to the Ubers in Act 5. I have no idea why, and would love to know, but I guess that's what the game wants, and that's what we've got to do. So after getting things set up, I decided to enter the Forgotten Sands first, because Duriel is generally considered the easiest dude, due to his middling damage and ease to separate from mobs. As you can see, not a lot of enemies spawned around him, and luckily I could go to work. As you can see, life tap cast on him on like the 3rd or 4th hit, which is always great, since once that happens, I almost never have to worry about my health. Smite always hits, and my attack speed makes sure that I'm always topped up. Speaking of, I'm not at the max frames for this fight though, since I'm frozen due to Duriel's Holy Freeze. But still, he doesn't deal much damage in return, but it does make this fight relatively slower since my DPS is overall down. Additional crushing blow would have helped me get him down quicker here, but let's not nitpick and move on to Iswell. Now if you think that my Duriel spawn was lucky, look at how good this Izzy spawn was. He was pretty much the first monster in the Furnace of Pain, and separating him from those necro dudes besides him was no problem at all due to the Enigma. Now I got life tap on him pretty early in the fight as well, and also pretty early, he killed my mercenary. That's fine though, since like I mentioned, I don't really need him for damage, and I can always resurrect him later when I move on to the next area for mana regen. That Izzy fight though showed how good that max frame breakpoint feels, and it chopped him down quickly, but Lilith is the baddest and scariest of them all. All my luck seemed to be used up here since she was surrounded by monsters and refused to move, so I had to start blasting her in place. Luckily life tap cast really soon again, so I was pretty much guaranteed to survive the fight. Still, her and all the various monsters surrounding her were doing a number on me, and you can see that with the intermittent dips in my health points. Which life tap was able to heal for now, but I was scared about the time when she'll die. Thankfully the monsters around her didn't one-shot me, but they did hit me into recovery frames. FHR wasn't something I had thought about while building this character, and I was paying for it here, and it made me teleport away. I also consumed the only 2 rejuvenations I had to during this whole experience, but by teleporting in, I was able to quickly retrieve the Diablo horn and peace out of there. Then there were 3. Of course, before I went to Tristram, I rebuffed with Treachery since my fate had run out, but then I went in and found that all of them were grouped in one corner. Therefore, I decided to lure them out, and I started with Diablo, and he obliged. Once he was a little ways away from his brothers, I teleported on top of him and started unleashing smites. He's probably the easiest Uber inside of Tristram since, as you can see, the only attacks he was hitting me with were his physical type attack and occasionally a fire circle of rage thingy, and neither of them did diddly squat. His most devastating weapons often end up being his minions, which you'll encounter while doing this event on Battle.net. Pluggy, however, doesn't emulate that, for better or for worse. We'll take what we can get though. Next up, I tried separating Bale, but when he wouldn't listen, I decided to go ahead and deal with Mephisto first. Thankfully, my life tap luck was on point here as well, as I got life tap on him on the first hit. You can see that my overstacked resistances with Kira's and Treachery was brought down to a mere 32 in both Lightning and Cold, and thus having those damage absorb rings helps out a lot. Bale was probably the hardest of the 3 Tristram Ubers. More than being hard, he was being annoying. He had a clone even before I started fighting him, and his appendages were not helping neither. This whole experience overall was surprisingly smooth though, and I never feared death. Except for that one time in Matron's place, but a few FHR Grand Charms can fix that. The Smiter is the all-around champion of Ubers, and this little journey definitely shows that. With that, I guess you can expect the next video to be identifying 10 unidentified torches. Will I get the perfect 2020? Exclamation mark, question mark, exclamation mark, question mark. I didn't get one here, but what I did get, I am very satisfied with. 1917, and it's a Paladin torch. Given that this whole video was pretty much me declaring that the Paladin is going to be my main character going forward, dang son, that's a good find. Seriously though, I am quite satisfied with this, and I hope you found this content satisfactory and riveting. Yours truly, with love.